Hey guys, got a floating beer here apparently. Listen, before we get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the video, a little bit about the reasoning behind me doing this, and hopefully it'll help you as well. So, first and foremost, I am not sponsored by BJCP in any way. This video is not sponsored by BJCP. This is my attempt to help myself retain some of the study material. Being that, I failed the entrance exam 3 times now, so not an easy exam, but also, I just don't think I was retaining. So by pulling out all this data, big word alert, extrapolating all this data, and things like that, I think I've been able to help myself to retain a little bit, and I'm hopeful that I can help you do the same. This is episode 1. There are other episodes to go, but if I don't feel like the interest is there, I don't know that I'll do it per se, but if the interest is there, I definitely will. If you're sitting at home ready to relax, wind down, and watch the video, grab yourself a beer, maybe drink it differently. Maybe drink it like a BJCP judge would. If you're listening to the podcast on a commute, please don't grab a beer. But maybe when you get home, you can grab a beer and you can think about some of the things that you heard via this video. So either way, I've enjoyed putting it together. If y'all want episode 2, let me know down in the comments. Keep in mind, I did the best I could with the resources I had to find this data and put it in a form that I thought was easy to learn, and so if there's an inaccuracy or something, don't blow me up on it. Let me know and I'll fix it. But there could be an inaccuracy or 2. So, but anyhow, that's about it. I hope you guys enjoy it. If you do, let me know. If you don't, let me know. Cheers. At the end of it all, relax. Don't worry. Have a homebrew. And we're back. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you guys grabbed a beer, maybe 2, maybe 12. Maybe even grabbed a homebrew to judge for yourself while you're going through this study guide. Or maybe you grabbed your favorite commercial brew and thought, maybe we can look at it a little differently today. Today we're going to take a look at the first in a series of videos that I'm going to do to kind of help myself study for this online exam, and I'm hoping that it'll maybe help y'all as well. We're going to go over an overview of the exam, some details about the exam, the types of questions and topics and things like that, and then we're going to dive right in at the very end of this video with all of the off flavors that are listed on the BJCP scorecard. So, and talk a little bit about each of them a little bit more in depth. So, hopefully that'll help get you started in the right direction with this exam. Hopefully it'll get me started back in the right direction with this exam. It's not an easy exam, as we're going to show you here in just a moment. Overview of the exam. What are you getting yourself into? Well, the beer entrance exam has 180 questions and a 60-minute time limit. Do the math there. 3 questions per minute. 20 seconds per question. Not easy. You must get at least 116 of those 180 questions correct, meaning 64% of the questions correct. Sadly, at the very end, you don't actually see your grade when you're finished. It really just tells you if you pass, fail. The exam costs $10, or you can get 3 chances for 20, much like those tear-off tickets at the local fairs. I do suggest the 3 for 20 deal, however. My hunch is, much like me, you're going to need more than one shot. In all disclosure, full disclosure, I failed this exam 3 times. I like to think I know a pretty good bit about beer, but apparently not. I have taken professional certification classes that have been worlds easier than the BJCP entrance exam. So, not to say BJCP isn't professional, but I think hopefully you catch my drift. You'll go to bjcp.coursewebs.com to register for your exam. Yeah, that little emoji face is what I had on my face the third time I failed. So question format. The questions are a mixture of true, false, multiple choice, and multiple choice, multiple answer. There will always be a best answer for the multiple choice and multiple answer questions. Multiple answer questions will always have at least one answer that is correct. There is no partial credit for the MA questions, so all correct answers must be selected. In the next slide, we're going to show you a breakdown of the types of questions and topics. Now keep in mind, the entrance exam is an open book. You can use any materials, whether it be a study guide, website, any other tool you can think of to help you while taking the exam. However, in my experience, it slows you down dramatically. In future slides, we'll talk about some a very useful website that will help you in your style comparison portion of the exam, which we'll talk about in the next video series. But it does slow you down, so you got to keep that in mind. You know, keep in the back of your head that you've only got an hour to do this test. So now I will say that there is an option to save questions for later. There's a star next to each question, and you can click on that star and save it for later. Let it alert you at the end of the test that it's still unanswered. My suggestion to you is kind of try to breeze through the 180 questions and answer what you know. That got me closest on my third try to actually passing, I believe. Again, you only hear pass fail, but I feel like I did really well on that final exam and was really disappointed to not have passed it. So my thoughts are breeze through it, answer what you know, save what you don't, and at the end you're going to get, you'll get a chart of unanswered questions, and you'll be able to go back and revisit those questions, providing you have left yourself some time. Another hint or clue or suggestion is make sure you scroll down on your computer screen, on your monitor. I think most monitors are only showing like 3 of the 5 questions per page. And first time I took it, I got to the very end and I realized that I had like 2 questions on every page still not answered. So highly suggest you spend a little bit of time scrolling down to make sure you've answered every question on every page. It will be very helpful. Keep in mind, this exam is designed to measure what you don't know and not what you do. I feel like that's pretty common in exams, but I have taken some exams where it felt like it was more pushing me to boast what I know and not what I don't. So this is definitely designed to measure what you don't know. Here is the topics and the question format. So in the very beginning, or not in the very beginning, because these questions are randomized, FYI. So they are all mixed in together. But first topic is going to be the BJCP program and ethics. You'll see a couple of question samples in the upcoming slides. They are all true and false, and there are 20 questions in that category. And then so on and so forth. Belgians and sour ales, browns and darks, English and American ales, lagers, wheats, IPAs, strong ales, so on and so forth. So you get down to the bottom with process and ingredients, which is pretty spread out in their questions, and also I think, no, not quite the biggest question bank, but 24, 32 questions or whatever in that category. And then beer characteristics has a bunch at 36. So that's kind of your breakdown and where you should look at maybe some of your weaknesses and some of your strengths and where you could use some study time. So let's talk about the program and ethics. Most of these questions in program and ethics category really are common sense. There'll be a couple of questions in the next few slides, so you'll know what to expect. There's 20 of these, as we said in the previous slide, true or false. They are pulled from a bank of questions in the official study guide. So if you go to the study guide, you can see a bank of 124 questions that the exam randomly pulls from. No exam is going to be the same. You can take this exam once a day. If you fail once and you go back in and you take it the following day, questions will be different. So it is never the same test. Some sample questions for the BJCP program and ethics topic. A competition organizer may serve as the judge director and may also serve as a judge, provided this person has no knowledge of the association between entries and entrants. Again, the organizer can direct judges, just as long as they have no knowledge of the association between entries and entrants. That is absolutely 100% true. Every competition that I have judged so far has been blind. So in other words, you have stewards that bring you your flight, your beers. No indication of who the brewer is. You know what style you're judging, but no indication of the brewer and things like that. So you'll get within your style sheet. You will get usually some identification to the beer, such as brewed with noble hops and black currants, or I don't know, whatever. So, but that's it. So as long as everything is blind, yes, a competition organizer can also be the director and can also judge. A member of the competition staff with access to information that associates entries with entrants may serve as a judge, provided this person does not divulge information about the entries and entrants to other judges. Well, I think we've answered that one in the previous. That is a big fat false. The head judge at a table should try and tutor apprentice or lower ranked judges if time permits. Well, every competition that I've judged, the head judge at the table or a certified ranking judge was paired with me as a non-judge, or a non-certified judge rather. So yes, absolutely. The head judge or any other certified judges or judges with more judging experience than you or what have you should always try and mentor, tutor us newbies as we go and learn how to judge a flight and things like that. The steward at the table. Now, we just talked about a steward. A steward is the person that brings you your beer. The steward at the table has sole responsibility for completing the cover sheets for beers in each flight. The answer to that one is false. Now, I'm going to also post some links to the score sheets, the cover sheets, the flight sheet, all of that stuff. I think there's some examples on the BJCP site to look at on those, so you'll know what I'm talking about when I talk about cover sheets and things like that, flight summary sheets and score sheets. The head judge at a table has no responsibility for filling out cover sheets for beers in his or her flight unless directed to do so by competition management. Let's break that down. Head judge, zero responsibility for filling out cover sheets for beers in his or her flight unless directed to do so by management. That is false. They do hold some responsibility for filling out cover sheets for beers in their flight. There is no need for the head judge to complete the flight summary sheet. The competition organizer can obtain all of that information from the cover sheets. Again, that's false. As a head judge at a table, it is, I'm not going to say sole responsibility, but it is partially your responsibility to fill out the cover sheets and the summary sheet before, after, and during the judging process. Here we go. It is a good idea to take a decongestant prior to a judging event to increase your sensitivity to the aromas of beer. Well, apparently that got all messed up, but false. Do not take a decongestant prior to. Pretty common sense there. Now, we'll go back up to that first one. When non-BJCP judges, such as us, evaluate entries in a competition, each non-BJCP judge should be paired with a BJCP judge. How many BJCP judges never mind. I can't barely even say it, so it doesn't really matter. That is absolutely true, 100%. You will always be paired with a certified BJCP judge. As a non-certified judge, you will not be allowed to officially judge best of shows and things like that. A lot of times you'll have some cool judges at your table that will allow you to partake in that, but your overall grading in that does not count. The courteous lower limit for scores assigned to problematic beers is 13 points. That's 100% true. Now, rewind to a competition I did last year, I believe, where one of our own members was the head judge, or the organizer. I'm sorry, the competition organizer, and had to call him over for a question because the beer was just that bad, infected, off flavors, whatever it was. I don't remember the exact, but I really wanted to score it like a 2. Just to say thanks for stopping by, but was told I could only, the lowest I could give it was 13 points. Now, we're not being mean here, right? So if we're scoring that low, we need to be prepared to back up our score on the score sheet. Hopefully I'll be able to get some decent score sheets, examples to post some links to. To become a BJCP certified judge, it is sufficient to pass the entrance exam, score at least 70% on the judging exam, and earn 5 judging points. So let's look at this a little deeper. Passing the entrance exam, that's what we're all trying to do, right? That makes us a provisional judge. Does not certify us, makes us provisional. At that point, I think we have a year to take the actual tasting exam. So the actual tasting exam, you must score at least 70% on. That is correct. And then you have to earn 5 judging points, which are earned by judging competitions. So that is 100% true. Now, beer characteristics, come on down. With all the beer that each of us has had in our lives, I'm sure this would be the easiest part of the exam. The part of the section, though, that you should probably spend the most time on is off flavors. How to identify them and which styles are they allowable in. That's going to be a pretty important factor in this sort of topic or section. There will be 24 true-false questions and 12 multiple-choice questions in this category. Over the next few slides, we are going to take a deep dive into off flavors. We're going to talk about how to identify them, what may cause them, and how can we avoid or control some of them. And then we're going to take a look at if there's any beer styles that these off flavors are more acceptable in than others. So before we get to the off flavors, I think there's a few characteristic questions I threw in here. One, and these are pulled right from the study, a study exam. So the region of origin for lambic is A, Dublin, B, London, C, the Seine Valley, or D, Flandera. The Seine Valley is the correct answer. German brewers often use acidified malt to balance the dark malts in a Schwarz beer. Is that true or false? That's false. Roasted barley is an acceptable ingredient for a Scottish heavy. Is that true or false? That is true. Now we dig deep into off flavors. We're going to identify and see when they are acceptable. Best way to learn an off flavor, however, is to actually experience them in a controlled environment using a sensory kit. I've been told that within our homebrew club, we will be having this experiment in the near future. If not, maybe we will look at a study group, or even if it doesn't hurt to do it more than once. I've done it a couple of times now, just to try to train my palate how to identify them. Mostly, some are much more identifiable and obvious and slap in your face than others. So if not, maybe we can put a study guide together. We can all pitch in and buy one of the Siebel Institute or something, one of their sensory kits, and spend an afternoon one day going over everything. All right, let's talk about diacetyl. So diacetyl smells quite a bit like butter popcorn, butterscotch. It can present with a slickness or creaminess on your tongue and in your mouth. It has been referred to as the brewer's original sin, but keep in mind, diacetyl is present in most beers at some sort of concentration, and it is actually a natural part of the brewing process. It's naturally produced by all yeast during fermentation and is then reabsorbed by yeast cells. Any diacetyl that is not reabsorbed can be a result of either high flocculating yeast, weak or mutated yeast, issues with oxygenating, low fermentation temperatures, or short boils. So how do we avoid this? How do we make sure we have the very least amount of diacetyl in our beer that we want or can get? Boil vigorously, not just a slow rolling boil. Make sure you're boiling vigorously and you're boiling for the right amount of time. Make sure you aerate your wort well before you cast your yeast or pitch your yeast. But avoid oxygenating the wort further once fermentation has begun. So let's not get those. Let's not introduce too much oxygen once fermentation has begun. You can also up your temperature by a couple of degrees near the end of fermentation. This is known as a diacetyl rest, and it can help the yeast reabsorb any leftover diacetyl. And last, don't be too quick to rack your young beer off the yeast cake. Ensure that your yeast has finished up doing its job before you move your beer off of it and into secondary or packaging or whatever you're going to do. There are some styles that allow for small amounts of diacetyl, and that would include Czech lagers, bitters, some stouts and porters, and Scottish and Irish ales. So, if you're brewing one of those styles, guess what? You might want it there in a certain concentration. But otherwise, if you've got a beer tasting like butter popcorn, or butterscotch, odds are you got too much diacetyl. And the yeast hasn't done its job. Acetaldehyde. So this one tastes like green apples, rotten apples, emulsion paint, or freshly cut pumpkin. Acetaldehyde is naturally occurring chemical. It's produced by yeast during fermentation in all beers. It is usually converted into ethanol alcohol, although where not enough yeast has been pitched or when dealing with higher alcohol beers, this process could take a little bit longer. This off flavor is caused when the yeast does not have enough time to convert the acetaldehyde into ethanol due to either lack of fermentation time, not enough yeast for the wort, or low quality yeast. And it can also be as a result of packaging problems, specifically in bottles. How do we avoid it? Pretty simple. Make sure you pitch enough yeast, and you're fermenting at the proper temperatures. Avoid aeration after fermentation has begun. Not much unlike diacetyl. If you're brewing a lager, allow fermentation to finish at slightly higher temperatures. Condition at slightly warmer temperature. Minimize your O2 introduction during bottling. So if you're bottling, be careful how much oxygen is being introduced during your packaging process. Use a diacetyl rest, much like diacetyl. Wait a couple of days after fermentation is complete before racking off the yeast. And lastly, as with pretty much everything, use sound sanitation practices. So you'll notice already in the first two that we've picked, they kind of share some of the same avoidance practices. So pay attention to that as we go through this list. It is a characteristic flavor, for instance, in bière de garde. So, but otherwise, it is absolutely considered an off flavor at high concentrations in any beer. All right, DMS, dimethyl sulfide. Some people have an issue with tasting this one. Same as acetaldehyde. Everybody's palate's a little different, and your tolerance to some of these flavors can be a little different. So, but this one can smell vegetal, like sweet corn or cooked cabbage, and tomato sauce, or even like shellfish and oysters. So, how is it caused? Well, compounds are created during the malting process of grain, which are later converted to DMS when heated. It is therefore primarily formed during wort production and to a lesser extent during fermentation. This makes DMS naturally more prevalent in pale ales and lagers, and can also be produced from bacteria that have managed to contaminate the beer. It can be driven off through evaporation when boiling wort. So, this next part is key to avoiding. Half-life, keep in mind, half-life for DMS is 40 minutes. So, if boiling off or evaporation can help stave off DMS, if you boil for 40 minutes or so, half of the DMS will be boiled off roughly, and if you boil what most people recommend at 60 or 90 minute vigorous boil, you're going to probably get rid of 70 to 80% of that DMS just in your boil. But it's also very important to not cover your boil kettle. Some of that condensation and such from the evaporation can drip down back into your wort and create DMS within your finished product. You also want to make sure you cool your wort rapidly. For every hour you have hot wort sitting around, you'll produce approximately a 30% increase in DMS. Infection can also produce a DMS-like flavor and aroma, though probably more so closer to cabbage than corn. If you should have a strong cabbage aroma or even flavor, I think you can bet pretty well that was caused by infection. Some other ways to avoid or control DMS in your beers: reduce the use of Pilsner malts, lager malts, and corn adjuncts. Higher moisture content in malt also can increase that. So make sure you're storing your malt in a cool, dry, airtight place. Over-sparging can increase DMS. So make sure you're always using a big enough kettle to allow for a vigorous boil without having to worry about a boil over or anything like that, and always leave the lid off. Ensure your vigorous boil is long enough. You want to boil for at least 60 minutes, right? So that's going to get you, somewhere roughly 60% or 70% of DMS boiled off at 60 minutes, and then at 90, you're pretty close to boiling 100% or definitely boiling 100% of the DMS off. Crash cool, so make sure your wort is cooled quickly and it doesn't sit around too warm too quick. And as always, practice good sanitation. DMS is part of the flavor profile in most lagers, though, particularly American light lagers and pre-prohibition pilsners, but DMS is not desirable in any style, really. You'll see here British ales are usually lowest in dimethyl sulfide, whereas German lagers and all malt beers are the highest at parts per billion. So just to kind of give you an idea, again, American light lagers and pre-prohibition pilsners, some levels of DMS are acceptable. chlorophenol. So these next two slides are pretty similar. Chlorophenol and phenol. Chlorophenol, there are a few differences, however. So chlorophenol, as you can guess from the name, is chlorine related. It can smell like Band-Aid or mouthwash, medicinal, antiseptic, disinfectant type aromas, hospital characteristics, kind of. It's imparted to the beer by the external contamination of either brewing raw materials or packaging materials with chlorophenols. So if you're rinsing off your equipment with chlorinated water or brewing with chlorinated water that has come into contact and the wort has come into contact with that, you can cause chlorophenols. Obviously, this is a big deal with sanitation. Not much else to say as far as avoiding it other than sanitation and your brewing water. So if you consistently seem to have that Band-Aid flavor in your beer, which I've had in the past, kind of have one now that has a bit of a Band-Aid flavor, aroma to it, and just so happens that I use city water to brew. I was too lazy to head out and get my normal brewing water, so I and I didn't treat my water. So, we can avoid this by not using city water or treating our city water to brew with. And then, your garden hoses and equipment and all that, you want to make sure it's not very porous equipment, and that you won't be contaminating with any of the chlorines associated with it. Finally, it's not a flavor that's acceptable in any style of beer, unless Clorox or somebody decided to make a beer, then maybe. But sorry, bad, terrible joke. Moving right along to phenolics. Phenolics can be a bit on the spicier side. The smell can be of cloves or bitterness, cough syrup, smoke, spices, herbs, that sort of thing. It is generally regarded as off flavors in beers that are bottom fermented. Three main sources of volatile phenols are ingredients, chemical taints, and yeasts and bacteria. Phenolic flavorings are normally due to the presence of wild yeast during fermentation or down to the use of specialty yeasts. Additional sources of phenolic flavor occur due to bacterial action from poor hygiene and from contamination of raw materials to phenolic compounds, including water and specialty malts, such as smoked and peated malts. So smoked and peated malts can kind of impart that phenolic aroma, such as cloves and things like that. While similar, again, there are some very distinct differences between phenols and chlorophenols, as I have outlined for you. To avoid phenols, use yeast that will provide fewer phenols. You'll find that on the yeast data sheet. If you're brewing with tap water, filter it. So RO, like reverse osmosis if you can, or treat it with any number of different ways that we treat water. Rinse extremely well using chlorine sanitizer after using chlorine sanitizers, or just avoid it altogether and use non-chlorine sanitizers. Our good buddy Sammy knows best when we talk about Star San. Use pure yeast strains and take proper precautions to avoid wild yeast contamination during fermentation. Watch your crush on your grains. If you overcrush your grains, can kind of cause that same issue. And keep your sparge above 6 pH and temperature below 168 degrees Fahrenheit. Those few things to think about when you're trying to avoid those. Now, there are some beers that phenols are acceptable in, as you can imagine. German and Belgian yeast strains will typically give you that phenolic characteristic in Hefeweizens and Belgian ales. Alcohol or hops. So off flavors such as alcohol flavors in beer are perceived as hot or spicy and are typically detected mostly by the nose. A warm, tingly sensation usually goes along with the spiciness, and it's often described as a hot or warming sensation, depending on the amount of alcohol that is present. Now, when ethanol combines with esters, fusel alcohols in beer are formed. These are longer chain alcohols that get produced when fermenting at higher temperatures. High fermentation temperatures. Remember those 3 words. Fusel alcohol is what causes the hot alcohol flavors in beer. These flavors can be perceived as having a vinous-like spiciness. Lower your fermentation temperatures and change yeasts if this continues to be a problem for you. Fermentation temperatures, big deal with this. Big deal with this. And then some yeast impacts as well. But very minute levels of fusels are appropriate in some high gravity beers, such as barley wines and old ales, and some of the very strongest of Doppelbocks, but otherwise unacceptable in any other style. Of course, higher alcohol beers are going to give you that boozy kick, but boozy and alcohol-y are 2 different kinds of things. So keep that in mind. Grassy flavors include vegetal, plant-like, hay, fresh leaves, or aromas reminiscent of fresh-cut grass. Now, I love fresh-cut grass. I love beer. I don't mind cutting the grass, but I don't want all of that in my cup, other than the beer part. So, the flavor and aroma typically is associated with chlorophyll. Hey, think back to your middle school or high school science days, which is a compound in hops and malt that allows the plants to convert light into energy. The most common cause of strong grassy flavors is poor storage of either malt or hops. In particular, storing either in a moist or hot environment can create aldehydes in addition to mold that can manifest green flavors. Moist hops and grain can yield grassy flavors. In fact, some brewers experiment with wet hops, which are freshly cut hops that have been harvested recently but not dried, and grassy flavors in these beers are also common. Long hop contact times and long boil times can also cause this. So again, we're getting into storage here. Make sure you're storing your hops in airtight packaging, your grains in airtight packaging. All of that will kind of lend itself back to these grassy, vegetal-like, plant-like flavors. So, and don't keep your beer sitting on the hotbed for too long. Can kind of soak up some of that grassy flavor that way, and long boil times can also cause it, apparently. These flavors do tend to be a bit more pronounced in light-flavored beers like wheat beer, Kolsch, Pilsners, Helles, light lagers, and cream ale. Certain hop varieties such as Fuggle, Mosaic, Tradition, and that one there you see that I can't pronounce, Boadicea hops, among others. But those can really lend grassy notes to a beer. So if you're using those hops, you already know that, and you're probably actually angling towards that sort of flavor or aroma, mostly flavor. But if you're not using those and you're getting it, then we know we're probably storing too moist or too warm, humidity, things like that. Solvents. So solventy flavors would include kind of a hot paint thinner, nail polish remover, turpentine, wood finish, or other harsh flavors and aroma. The intensity can vary from a slight hot finish to a very strong turpentine flavor. Fortunately for all of us, it's fairly rare in homebrewing. It's a compound called ethyl acetate, which is also widely used in glues, nail polish remover, and other household solvents. Ethyl acetate is actually an ester produced by the esterification of alcohol during fermentation. It is a very common byproduct of fermentation, and it comes from an enzyme called acetate transferase, AAT. It is yeast specific, but is common for many ale yeasts, particularly English ale yeasts, which are high in esters. So basically, solvent off flavors are caused by out of control ester production. Ester production is increased at higher fermentation temperatures. So often we will find solvent off flavors when a beer is fermented too hot. So what's the second or third time we've heard fermentation temperatures? So watch your fermentation temperatures. Again, you can see on the yeast data sheet the range of fermentation temperatures that you want to have with that particular yeast. So there we go. Again, pretty rare in homebrewing, but it does happen and is not acceptable in any beer style. Yeasty. So yeasty off flavors can appear bready, yeasty, doughy, or even the flavor of a Vegemite sandwich. Takes me back to a song, but I won't bore you with those details. Most brewers are familiar with this green beer flavor, having tasted their beer when it was still young. The main cause of yeasty beer is simply the beer is just too young. Beer goes through changes as it matures, including mopping up off flavors like dactyl, and also a critical process called flocculation, where the yeast slowly falls out of the beer. So flocculation occurs at different rates depending on the beer and the yeast strain used. I've said it before and I'll say it this time again. You can refer to the yeast data sheet. It'll tell you the flocculation rate of your specific strain. A strain with higher flocculation rates typically will clear quicker than those with a slower rate, and some strains are also more yeasty than others. Some beers can have a bready characteristic, but in general that would come from your grain selection rather than from your yeast. How about sour / acidic? So typically identified as a tartness in aroma and flavor, whether it be sharp and clean like lactic acid or vinegar like acetic acid. What is it? Simply an infection. Now, of course, we are assuming you're not brewing a sour beer, but without any other way of putting it, we are dealing with an infection. Lactobacillic bacteria producing lactic acid and responsible for a relatively smooth sourness. The same kind of tang or sourness you would find in yogurt and sourdough breads. Pediococcus bacteria also produce lactic acid, and with time, they can also create diacetyl, that buttered popcorn flavor we talked about earlier. Yeah, and then acetobacter is the bacterium that makes acetic acid, which is responsible for that puckering, vinegar-like quality. A one-time issue is almost guaranteed to be an infection or a process issue, typically in sanitation. Again, only really, this off flavor is really only acceptable in a sour beer like a Flanders or sour ale. Something openly fermented or wild ale, things like that. Proper sanitation for sure. And then that's going to be the big thing for you to avoid here. But there are also other things. Don't mash for longer than 2 hours. Make sure you're using a yeast strain that's appropriate to the style. Pitch the right amount of healthy yeast. That way there's no real lag time. And then avoid high temperature fermentations. So there we go. We said it again. And then, take a look at your equipment. Specifically fermenters, because plastic fermenters and even glass, they can get scratched and can hide bacteria. Stainless steel is obviously the way to go. Glass is the second best. Some plastic can be an issue. And then watch your acidic fruit additions and things like that. And that should keep you from having the sour flavor. Sulfur. Hydrogen sulfide. Smells like boiled or rotten eggs, a burning match, or raw sewage. Kind of like a bad night after a good night at Taco Bell. Sorry, I had to. Sulfur or hydrogen sulfide is present in all beers and concentrations vary considerably from beer to beer. It is an off flavor in most beer styles. Hydrogen sulfide is produced naturally by all yeast during fermentation. Lager yeast tend to create greater sulfur aromas than ale strains, so at low levels it can impart a fresh flavor to beers. But at high concentrations, it becomes an off flavor. CO2 can carry most of that hydrogen sulfide away, so conditioning or lagering after primary fermentation can ensure any leftover sulfur smells or tastes fade over time. So, how do we avoid it? How do we control it? Give your beer enough time. Ale fermentations are vigorous, and much of the sulfide is scrubbed out by released CO2 during fermentation. Lager yeast will produce a little bit more, and they tend to be a little bit more mellower in fermentation. So if you get a lager whose fermentation is done, but it still kind of smells a little sulfury, may need some more maturation time before you bottle it. And then get the beer off the yeast cake and into a secondary as soon as fermentation is complete. Those would be some of the big guys there on avoiding hydrogen sulfide. However, it is a signature flavor character in Burton Ale. Kind of funny, we discussed Burton Ale a little bit on the Facebook page. Metallic ferrous sulfate. It's a smell of iron, pennies, ink, blood, copper, rusty, those types of things. While the smell can be quite clear, it's been found that if you rub it on the back of your hand, rub a little beer on the back of your hand, you can really pick up some of that very strong metallic odor, and can make it a little easier to identify. What is it? Ferrous sulfate is a taint and occasionally an off flavor in beer. It primarily affects beer mouthfeel, but sometimes beer odor can also be affected. Most times this comes down to your equipment. So the raw materials and your equipment. A lot of us started on brewing on turkey fryers. I know I did. First couple of batches I did when I went from brewing inside to taking it outside to a turkey fryer. I used a turkey pot, which is typically aluminum and not stainless steel. So it's that sort of thing that can bring that metallic flavor into your beer. But packaging can do it too. So metal cans, now cans have come a long way. Obviously, bottle caps and kegs, if not stainless steel. So I'm not sure, caps, the old school caps, I think most of your new school caps on bottle caps are pretty well taken care of in that respect. So, and then improperly stored grains can also do it. So how do we avoid and control? Treat your brewing water to remove these ions or find a different water source in general. If you're going to use plastic, make sure it's food grade or use glass or stainless steel. And avoid any containers or fittings that may corrode. So corrosion, I think, we can talk about brass fittings compared to stainless steel fittings and things like that. Typically not acceptable in any style of beer in high concentration. Estery. I once knew an ester. I know, that was terrible. But estery, this one can smell a banana or pear drops, and lesser extent strawberries, raspberries, grapefruit. Isoamyl acetate is a common ester flavor present in all beers, but concentrations vary considerably from beer to beer. Isoamyl acetate is a naturally occurring byproduct of fermentation. So strong fruity flavors or inappropriate fruity flavors for the style are sometimes a result of underpitching or high fermentation temperatures. I'm going to drill that one home for you. As a general rule, the higher the fermentation temperature, the more esters the yeast will produce. Again, you will find this on your yeast data sheet, and I'm pretty sure every single one you look at will show you the higher you ferment in temperature, the more esters you'll produce. Low oxygen levels can also help increase the production of esters. Again, how do we avoid and control? Choose the appropriate yeast for the style. Aerate your wort thoroughly before fermentation starts. Pitch the right amount of healthy yeast. Maintain good temperature control. If you brew a beer that winds up with a high level of isoamyl acetate, try aging it to decrease the esters. Esters are key flavors in some lagers and ales, and absolute musts in German-style wheat beer, such as Hefeweizens and many Belgian ales. TCA. This one's a moldy, musty, corked wine, damp cellar, that sort of aroma. TCA, which 2, 4, 6, no, never mind. Trichloroanisole, I think. Maybe Cahill can help me with that one. Is a chemical created by mold, which consumes chlorinated phenols and metabolizes them. And it can be detected by humans at extremely low levels. So nanograms per liter. We're talking nanograms per liter in flavor threshold on this one. Like less than 10. Generally, TCA is caused when beer is fermenting somewhere that is damp or wet, or where the grain has developed mold in storage. However, TCA is capable of migrating through most semi-porous packaging, and thus cross-contamination can occur across several areas of beer production, from raw materials to final packaging. How do we avoid and control? Always clean and sanitize your equipment before and after every use. Also, kind of let it dry. Ensure porous equipment such as plastic and wood are dry before storing. Do not brew or transfer beer where mold is likely to be growing. And don't let brewing equipment touch surfaces that are damp and likely moldy. So all of that, and make sure you're storing your grain in an airtight container. Typically not a flavor you want in any beer. Light Struck. This one's the fun one. This one's the easy one to recreate too, but also one of the easiest ones, if not the easiest one, to identify. Straight skunk or freshly brewed coffee. When you smell it, it can also smell musty and be similar to burned rubber or cat musk. Light Struck's an off flavor associated with exposure to light. Beer packaged in clear or green glasses are most at risk of becoming skunked. It's believed that even Mexican beers, at some point, lemons and limes were introduced to mask some of that skunkiness. Light-colored beers and beers with a lot of hops are also more prone to become skunked. Beers that have been bittered exclusively with chemically modified hop bitter acids don't develop this flavor. Dark beers and beers that utilize isomerized hop extracts are less susceptible to becoming Light Struck. Again, how do we avoid and control? If you're buying commercial beer, buy it in cans or brown bottles. If you buy clear or green bottled beer, make sure you're storing it properly and not right out in the light. Homebrew, keep away from light, whether during fermentation or packaged. Package in kegs or brown bottles. And use fewer hops. Sometimes the hops alone can give that skunk. Once activated with that packaging, some of the packaging issues can give you some of that skunked feel. As we all know, it's an off flavor that's not acceptable in any style of beer, unless, of course, you are a big fan of Heineken. I'm listening for the laughs out there. Did I get a laugh out of anybody? Darn, it's recorded, so I can't tell. So anyhow, that's Light Struck or Mercaptan, some people call it, I believe. maybe not, but anyhow. Oxidation. Cardboard. Wet cardboard or paper. Trans 2-nonenal, maybe? Nonenal is an off flavor in beer associated with aging. Formation of this off flavor is more produced when precautions have not been taken in relation to minimizing the process of oxidation. An excessive level of oxygen being introduced to the beer, especially while wort is still warm or after fermentation is complete, can give you that cardboard or sherry-like flavor. Oxidation typically occurs when oxygen negatively reacts with the molecules in the wort or beer. It can be difficult to avoid because aeration of wort before pitching yeast is necessary. It is almost always a result of unnecessary splashing of fermented beer, i.e. transferring beer from one vessel to the next. Too much headspace in bottles can also lead to oxidation. You also want to avoid any excessive stirring or splashing of the wort, as typically this is your first place to pick up too much oxygen and is also called hot side aeration. Not much else to give to you on that one besides keep beer below 50 degrees if cellaring can sometimes warm cellaring can give you a oxidation issue. Don't age beer unless it's meant to be aged. So in other words, stouts and things like that have a better tolerance to aging than say IPAs or lagers. Once fermentation starts, we don't want to aerate anymore. And don't leave more than 1 to 2 inches of headspace when you are bottling. And then finally, make sure you're using an antioxidant bottle cap if you're bottling. And cap on foam if possible. So those are all ways to try to avoid oxidation in your beer and also what causes it not acceptable in any beer. I think we've all had a beer that had that wet cardboard or papery flavor to it. Astringency. This one is dry, grainy, mouth-puckering, tannic sensation. Think of sucking on a wet tea bag or a grape skin. Astringency, easy for you to say again, gives a puckering sensation, almost powdery or metallic in the mouth. It can also be tart, vinegary, tannin-like, and drying. Polyphenols or tannins are the number one cause of such off flavors in beer. Tannins are found in the skins or husks of the grain as well as in the skin of fruit. Steeping grain for too long or grain that has been excessively milled or overcrushed can release tannins. Overhopping can also lend a hand in creating astringent qualities. Not much else to add in there other than the overmilling. I think is a pretty big part of astringency. And then sparge temperature can be a big deal. And don't oversteep the grains. A great sour beer will exhibit astringent properties. True astringency is not acceptable in any beer style. Moving right along to our final and much less common, but I add this because in a competition that I judged, a commercial competition, we had a cheesy beer. It wasn't just like me, cheesy, or like a bad label on the bottle or can. Literally stale cheese or sweaty socks. When you get that aroma. Isovaleric flavor notes are characteristics of some beer styles. For example, India Pale Ale. Typical cheesy characters are often associated with beers of very high bitterness. In pale lager beers, isovaleric character is regarded as an off flavor. So, and if I'm not mistaken, the beer that I was judging when we had this was an IPL, and it was pretty nasty on the nose. Isovaleric off flavors are generally introduced by old hops The compound arises as hops age and lose their bitter alpha acids, producing a flavor of cheese, sweat, or must. How do I avoid it? How do I control it? Use fresh hops. Ensure you buy the freshest of hops and store correctly. Store hops in a freezer in an oxygen-free, vacuum-sealed container always. You can try and mellow out those cheesy notes by aging a beer, if it is a beer worthy of aging. And then, as with pretty much everything else we've talked about, use good sanitation practices. Isovaleric is considered appropriate as a background note in some English-style ales and can be stronger in beers purposely fermented with Brettanomyces. So that is it. That is all of the off flavors listed on a BJCP scorecard plus one. There are some others, some other off flavors that may be worthy of mention, but these are the ones that you'll expect to pop up on the exams. I was able to find some pretty good blog posts on beerandbrewing.com, beersmith.com, learn.kegerator.com. I'll add in there. It was another great resource in what I'm doing, what I've done here, and can really help you further understand all of these and so many more. This will bring us to the end of Series 1. The next series is Beer Style Characteristics and Comparisons. It will likely be a long one. Really, that's about 70 to 80% of the exam. So what we might start doing is breaking down maybe 4 or 5 different styles based on that question topic sheet that I showed you earlier on. And try and see if maybe we can knock some of those out and maybe list some, maybe bullet points some important details to the different styles of beer. I think there's 26 BJCP styles, 28, something like that. So there are quite a few of them. And then when we start throwing in questions such as a English porter differs from an American porter in that an American porter will use X hops and an English porter will use Y hops, or the OG of a English porter, or how about a 1065 OG is acceptable in both English porter and American porter, or those sorts of things. So those are the really difficult questions, guys. That is where I have failed 3 times now. I mentioned a cool website. I will get a link to that site below, so if you want to get a heads up, start on that studying, and we will go from there. If you have any comments or questions, please comment below. Thumbs up it if you love it. Comment if you hate it. Nah, you know what? Keep it to yourself if you hate it. Comment if you have a question about it. No, really, I'm a big boy. This did take a lot of work, but it's helping me too. So, but if you need any help at all with any of this, or if you have comments for the next video series or things, any of that nature, just please feel free to reach out, either here on the video or through my socials or whatever. So we'll hope to talk to you guys soon. We'll hope you enjoy this one. We'll hope it helps you as it helped me. As Mr. Papazian said, relax. Don't worry. Have a homebrew. Good luck on the exam. We'll talk to you soon.